Think about the last thing you bought online. Maybe it was a smartphone, a pair of sneakers, or even just a bag of coffee beans. Odds are, that item spent weeks floating across the ocean on a massive container ship. We live in a world where 90% of global trade travels by sea, yet most of us never give the oceans a second thought. That is, until a missile hits a tanker in the Red Sea, or a naval blockade threatens to starve a nation. Suddenly, those blue lines on the map look less like trade routes and more like tripwires. Today, we are diving deep into the world of maritime kinetic operations. We are talking naval blockades, tanker strikes, and the strategic chess match playing out in places like the Bab al-Mandab, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Black Sea. Why are these ancient choke points suddenly the front lines of modern conflict? And what happens when the rules of global shipping are rewritten by drones and sea mines?
It is fascinating because the oceans have always been the ultimate global commons. But what we are seeing now is a radical shift in how nations and even non-state actors project power. To really understand what is happening, we have to look past the dramatic headlines and analyze the strategic logic behind these operations. If we apply a classic strategic framework, like the MOST analysis, which looks at mission, objectives, strategy, and tactics, the picture becomes much clearer. Take the disruptions in the Red Sea, for example. The mission of the disruptive actors is not to defeat a superpower navy in a traditional battle. The mission is geopolitical leverage. Their objective is to impose massive economic costs on the international community to force political concessions. The strategy is maritime interdiction, and the tactics are highly asymmetric, using low-cost anti-ship missiles and one-way attack drones to target commercial vessels.
It is the ultimate asymmetric equation, isn't it? A $2,000 drone forcing a $1 million air defense missile to be fired in response. If we look at this through a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, that asymmetry is clearly the greatest strength of these disruptive forces. They do not need a $1 billion destroyer to shut down a shipping lane. They just need to raise the cost of insurance so high that commercial fleets refuse to transit the area.
Exactly. But the weakness in that approach is sustainability and the risk of overwhelming retaliation. While these actors have the opportunity to exploit geographic bottlenecks, the threat they face is a coordinated global backlash. When you disrupt the global economy, you do not just anger one country. You threaten the supply chains of everyone, from Europe to Asia. This brings us to the SPEAR framework, which evaluates the security, politics, economics, allies, and resources at play. When a choke point like the Strait of Hormuz or the Red Sea is threatened, it triggers an immediate security response. Allies who might disagree on domestic politics suddenly find themselves aligned on the necessity of keeping shipping lanes open. They pool their resources to launch escort operations, but those resources are finite and incredibly expensive to maintain over long periods.
And the economic fallout is never just local. If we zoom out even further using a pestle lens, analyzing the political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal dimensions, the ripples are massive. Politically, governments face intense domestic pressure when inflation spikes. Economically, rerouting ships around the Cape of Good Hope adds weeks to transit times and burns millions of dollars in extra fuel. Socially, this delays critical goods, including food and medicine. Technologically, we are seeing the rapid evolution of autonomous naval warfare, from aerial drones to crewless surface vessels. Environmentally, a single successful strike on an oil tanker can trigger an ecological catastrophe. And legally, these operations challenge the very foundation of international maritime law, specifically the right of innocent passage.
It is a complete systemic shock. Every single one of those dimensions is interconnected. When you pull one thread in the Black Sea, you feel the tension in the supermarkets of North Africa, which rely on Ukrainian grain.
It really shows how interconnected everything is, from global economics to military strategy, and honestly, how it all filters down into our daily lives. It is the kind of complexity that shapes our world, even if we do not see it happening. And speaking of deep dives into these complex connections, if you are enjoying this conversation, you should definitely check out our broader network, particularly our flagship show, The New Sentinel.
The New Sentinel is a fantastic podcast dedicated to providing in-depth discussions and deep dives into a wide array of topics. They cover everything from the glitz and glamour of pop culture to the strategic intricacies of military operations like the ones we are dissecting today.
Each episode is thoughtfully crafted to offer listeners a comprehensive understanding of the subject matter, featuring expert interviews, detailed analysis, and engaging storytelling. Whether you are a pop culture enthusiast or someone with a keen interest in global security, The New Sentinel has something for everyone. We highly recommend you tune in, view, subscribe, and comment to stay informed and entertained. And if you are an entrepreneur, they can even help you advertise your product or service to a highly engaged audience.
It is definitely a show worth adding to your queue. But returning to our global chessboard, how do these actors decide when to push the envelope and when to back off? This is where game theory becomes incredibly useful. If you look at maritime kinetic operations, they are essentially a continuous, high-stakes game of chicken.
The classic hawk-dove game. You have the international coalition trying to maintain deterrence, and the disruptive actor trying to test the limits of that deterrence.
Precisely. In game theory, both players are trying to predict the other's moves based on payoffs. For the coalition, the ideal outcome is to deter attacks without starting a major regional war. They want to play a defensive game. For the challenger, the payoff is in showing that they can bypass this deterrence. If the challenger attacks and the coalition responds too aggressively, it risks a wider conflict, which the coalition wants to avoid. If the coalition responds too weakly, the challenger wins by showing the world that the superpower's protection has limits. So, the challenger pushes right up to the threshold of triggering a full-scale military response, exploiting the coalition's reluctance to escalate.
It is a delicate equilibrium, but a highly unstable one. A single miscalculation, a missile hitting a crew quarters instead of an empty cargo hold, can instantly shift the game from controlled friction to open warfare. We saw a variation of this dynamic in the Black Sea campaign. Ukraine practically lacked a conventional navy, yet they managed to severely damage and push back a major naval power's fleet.
The Black Sea is a masterclass in asymmetric maritime denial. By using a combination of cruise missiles, drone boats, and intelligence sharing, they forced the opposing fleet to retreat from its historical bases. They did not try to match their opponent ship for ship. Instead, they changed the payoff matrix of the game. They made the cost of operating warships in the Western Black Sea unacceptably high. It proved that you do not need command of the sea to deny it to your enemy.
That is a profound shift. For centuries, naval doctrine was defined by Alfred Thayer Mahan's idea of commanding the seas through decisive fleet battles. Now, it seems the goal is sea denial, making the waters too dangerous for anyone to use safely.
It represents a democratization of precision strike capabilities. The technology required to threaten a multi-billion-dollar warship is now accessible to smaller nations and even insurgent groups. The legal and operational norms that kept the oceans relatively peaceful for decades are being tested like never before.
As we look to the future, it raises some unsettling questions. If the oceans are no longer guaranteed to be safe, does the era of hyper-globalization begin to unravel? Will we see a return to armed merchant convoys, or perhaps a fracturing of global trade into regional spheres protected by localized naval alliances?
The era of taking free navigation for granted is certainly over. We are likely entering a period of contested commons, where shipping routes will require active protection, and companies will have to price geopolitical risk directly into the cost of every good. The future of maritime security is not just about building bigger ships. It is about adaptability, resilience, and understanding the strategic calculations of those who wish to disrupt the flow of the world.
The high seas have always been a reflection of global power dynamics, and right now, those dynamics are shifting beneath our feet. The next time you look at a global map, remember that those vast blue spaces are not empty voids. They are the critical infrastructure of our modern world, and the game being played on them is far from over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and we will see you next time.